Picture this for a second. It is the dead of night in 1940s London. You've just managed to catch a few precious hours of shut-eye, finally sinking into this deep, exhausted sleep. But then, the wail begins. You know the sound. It starts low, and then it rises into this terrifying mechanical scream that literally shakes the dust from the rafters above you. Now here's the thing. You don't freeze, you don't hide under the bed, you throw off the covers, and you prepare to run directly into the chaos. So let's dive right into this explainer and discover exactly what it meant to be the absolute first line of defense during one of the most terrifying bombardments in all of human history.
To really wrap our heads around the immense stakes here, we have to look at the sheer mind-boggling scale of the London Blitz. Just think about this. For 56 out of 57 consecutive nights, the Luftwaffe rained absolute destruction down on the capital. The British public, they had to adapt fast. They learned to shelter in purpose-built spaces, church basements, and way down deep in the underground stations. By the end of it all, an estimated 17,500 lives were claimed in London alone. That's a staggering number. But while everyone else was heading below ground for safety, there was a very specific group of civilian volunteers who were actually stepping out into that lethal falling sky.
So, when those air raid sirens sounded, the ones the locals chillingly nicknamed Wailing Willie, well, that was your ultimate call to action. As an air raid warden, your assigned post covered a very specific sector of the city. You, personally, were responsible for the safety, the coordination, and ultimately the survival of about 500 people in your immediate neighborhood. Imagine having 500 lives on your shoulders. But here's the kicker. Your job didn't just start when the bombs started falling, it actually began with the darkness.
To truly understand your new reality, just look at the dramatic contrast in everyday life. Think about peacetime, right? A lit match is entirely harmless. It's nothing. But in 1940, leaving even a tiny chink of light visible from the street could literally invite a bomb straight down onto your block. Or at the very least, it would result in an impertinent warden knocking loudly on your door to hand you a heavy fine. This was the reality of the blackout, and enforcing it was the warden's very first massive headache. I mean, everybody had to use thick black curtains or completely opaque blackout paint. Absolutely no streetlights. Even the tiny red glow from a cigarette was strictly banned outside.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates just how lethal the blackout was even before a single bomb dropped from the sky. You see, navigating those pitch-black streets caused a horrific spike in car accidents. King's surgeon Wilfred Trotter actually pointed out this staggering statistic in the British Medical Journal. He noted that simply by frightening the nation into these blackout regulations, the Luftwaffe was effectively killing 600 British citizens a month without ever taking to the air. 600 people a month, and it cost the enemy exactly nothing.
Because the stakes were literally life and death, the enforcement was incredibly strict. And sometimes, frankly, it was a bit absurd. Take George Lovell, for example. The poor guy put up his blackout curtains and then just stepped outside to make sure they worked. Well, they didn't, and he was arrested right there on the spot and fined for breaking the rules. Or how about Susan Home? She was fined 10 shillings because a light showed through her unblacked-out scullery window. Oh, and she actually got a bonus summons on top of that for wasting fuel. The rules were so incredibly complex and convoluted that Lord Chief Justice Caldecott publicly criticized the lighting restrictions order, which ran to 33 exhaustive articles. To the average everyday citizen, these regulations read like absolute gobbledygook.
Now, as a warden, you weren't just some vigilante roaming around in the dark. You were bound by the official Air Raid Warden's Handbook, and this book explicitly stated that you are not a policeman, you're not a special constable, and you definitely don't have police powers. Instead, you are meant to be a responsible, reliable civilian chosen to advise, help, and lead your fellow citizens. Think of yourself as the vital link between the people in your sector and the official authorities when calamity inevitably strikes.
To prove that authority, you carried this official identification card everywhere you went. And it wasn't just a piece of paper either. It literally empowered you to summon the full resources of the official civil defense organization. We're talking police, fire patrols, ambulances, the whole shebang, whenever an emergency erupted in your sector. It gave you real weight in a crisis.
Okay, so let's get back to the action. Wailing Willie is sounding its awful siren. According to the handbook, you must immediately grab your gear. So you throw on your armlet and your steel helmet, which, by the way, was painted with a bright white W right on the front so you could actually be seen in the pitch-black chaos. You attach your anti-gas curtain, you grab your eye shield, you strap on your civilian duty respirator, and crucially, you double-check that you have your whistle right there in your pocket.
The very second you step outside, you have to execute a frantic mental checklist. First up, clear the streets. Anyone who is more than 5 minutes away from their home goes straight to a public shelter. No arguments. Second, halt all vehicles. You draw them immediately to the curb to clear the paths for the fire engines that are definitely coming. Third, and this one really puts you in the era, secure the horses. You have to unhitch them from their carts and tie them to lampposts in the side streets to give them some protection before the bombs actually hit.
And then, the sky lights up. But here's the thing, it isn't always the massive high-explosive bombs dropping first. Often, it's the incendiaries. Just imagine these 18-inch cylinders, weighing maybe only a couple of pounds, but they are packed to the brim with highly combustible chemicals. They drop in these massive clusters, literally raining down like mechanical locusts. They crash right through the roofs and hit the cobblestone streets, instantly igniting. The horrific strategy here was that these thousands of small fires would act as glowing, impossible-to-miss targets for the heavier bombers that were following right behind them.
To stop your sector from becoming a giant glowing beacon for high explosives, you had to act frantically. Enter the stirrup pump. Using this thing required intense, highly coordinated 3-person teamwork. Person 1 directs the water from the nozzle. Person 2 is physically pumping the water, standing on a circular metal stirrup at the base just to keep the whole contraption stable. And Person 3, they are frantically running back and forth to refill the water bucket. Amidst the absolute terror of the raid, you and your neighbors had to stay completely on the beam, meaning perfectly focused, to extinguish these chemical fires before they could spread and doom the whole street.
Now, when the high explosives do eventually hit, you are the absolute first responder on the scene. You immediately fall back on the official 12-point damage report framework. The handbook gives a really strict warning about this part. Your report must be as brief as a telegram, and you must never use code words. I mean, in the excitement and the pure nervous tension of a bombing, using abbreviations for things like poison gas could cause deadly delays. You simply could not afford to make a goof here. Lives literally depended on your clarity.
Picture yourself standing there in the thick smoke. You start running through points 1 through 6. You declare the damage, you shout your post number, and you try to identify the bomb type. You pinpoint the exact position and the time. But critically, point 6, you have to estimate casualties. And specifically, you need to note if any victims are pinned or trapped under the wreckage.
And you can't stop there. You keep going. Points 7 through 12 require an immense amount of logistical awareness. You have to ask yourself, are there spreading fires? Are the gas and water mains shattered? Which roads are completely blocked by rubble? You have to scan the dark for the terrifying silhouette of unexploded bombs, list the services you've already called for, and demand exactly what further assistance is required. Every single second counts here. There is absolutely no time for whistling Dixie while your neighbors are trapped in the debris.
Finally, after hours of pure adrenaline, sheer terror, and desperately digging through the rubble, the sun rises. The beautiful, long, steady note of the all-clear siren sounds across the city. The fires might still be smoldering around you, and the true devastating scale of the night's destruction is finally revealed in the harsh daylight. And honestly, you know what the wildest part of all this is? For most of these volunteer wardens, after submitting their final damage reports, they simply dusted off their clothes, washed their faces, and went right back to their normal day jobs.
You might be wondering how on earth anyone could mentally survive this routine. While Dorothy Lee, who actually volunteered to be a warden alongside her father when she was just 16 years old, explained it beautifully. She said, "You all have something you must do. You had to be orderly and do these things, and I think that kept me sane in as much as I was panicking that day." It's incredible, but that immense, highly structured responsibility actually grounded ordinary citizens amidst the unimaginable horror happening around them. The truly incredible thing about the people who wore that white W on their helmet is their sheer diversity. They were a true cross-section of society. You had men like George A. Roberts, a Trinidadian veteran of the First World War whose prior battlefield experience perfectly prepared him for the chaos of the Blitz. You had teenagers like Elaine Kidwell, whose boss literally bent the rules to let her serve at just 17 years old. And you had intellectuals like Fernando Henriquez. He actually viewed the fire service as a sort of refuge, using the quiet standby periods at the station to study, and he ultimately went on to win an open scholarship to Oxford. Now let's look at one of the most incredible stories from the source materials, that of Esther Bruce. Born in 1912, Esther was a Guyanese-British seamstress who gave up her regular job in 1941 to do war work. By day, she was literally on her hands and knees scrubbing and cleaning the wards of Fulham and Brompton hospitals. But by night, Esther volunteered as a fire guard.
Armed with absolutely nothing but her tin helmet, a fire guard armband, and a stirrup pump, she stood directly on the roofs of those hospitals during the raging air raids, fighting off incendiary bombs just to protect the vulnerable patients below.
The bravery of black frontliners like Esther, whose efforts were heavily championed by the League of Colored Peoples at the time, was utterly vital to the city's survival. They were true heroes. Looking back on our harrowing nights on the hospital roofs, Esther simply said, "It was dangerous and I was scared, but when the air raids continued, we knew we would all have to do our bit and pitch in."
And you know, their monumental efforts were not in vain. At the end of the war, Esther actually took her 14-year-old adopted niece, Kathy, to see St. Paul's Cathedral. Looking at this majestic building standing completely untouched amidst a sprawling landscape of utter destruction, Esther remarked, "There's not a mark on it. We're lucky. We've still got half a street, but some poor souls have ended up with nothing." The miraculous survival of St. Paul's became the ultimate symbol of hope and London's unbroken spirit, a spirit that was quite literally defended by those everyday wardens on the ground.
So after stepping into the shoes of a 1940s air raid warden, after navigating that deadly blackout and facing down mechanical locusts with nothing but a bucket of water, I want to leave you with this final thought. Look around your own street right now, at your own neighbors. If the sky fell tonight, would you have the moxie to put on the tin helmet and be the first line of defense?